I am back with another Budget with a Friend video. You all have been submitting your information. If you're interested to have me review your budget and give you my suggestions on how I would map out your finances if I woke up in your shoes, then go ahead and fill out the form. I'll leave the link in my description box. So all of this is kept private. There's no names or anything like that. You just send in your numbers. So that is what I had received here today. So what I did, I just took the information and I plugged in all of her information. So when her paydays are, when her bills are due, and then in the bottom, this is just a little bit of information about her. So she is a family of 5 and 1 to come. So congratulations on the new baby that is coming. She does not have an emergency fund, but she wants to start growing that emergency fund and save for a home. She also would love to increase her tithe amount to reach that 10%. This is the debt that she does have: 2 car loans, student loans, and then I have a Bank of America debt amount, which is only $300. So if you do the snowball method, then you can pay that off pretty quick. So her total debt is $29,700. So I plugged in the numbers on the calendar first, and then I just filled in this bill tracker with the amounts that are due along with the due date. One other thing that she did mention is she does have certain sinking funds. So a sinking fund, if you don't know what that is, you're just slowly saving up money for a specific event or purchase that you want to make. She has a few here. So there's medical for her newborn baby, somebody's birthday, she wants to start a birthday fund, Christmas and Thanksgiving. Each of these blocks, I just wrote in what they would be when she saves that allotted amount. So $15 represents this block, $50 represents this one, and so on and so forth. She already has some savings in here, and her goal amounts are right up at the top. For each of these, she wants to save a few $100s, so that way she can set herself up for success, her and her family. With the bill tracker, what I love is that this allows you to break down your finances even further. This is what allows you to be better organized when it comes to creating a budget, because budgeting, it does not have to be complicated. It just has to make sense for you and for your family. So I love using this, and it keeps me accountable. So I hope that it can inspire you to do the same. So I just took in her numbers and I filled this all out. And I also filled in some of her variable spending that she told me. So she has her groceries, gas allowance, pet fund, allowance for her sons, and then miscellaneous for any of those random purchases that tend to happen throughout the month. The one thing that I was very, very surprised is she says that her budget for groceries for the month is $240. I'm not sure how she's able to do this being a family of 5, but we're just going to go with her number on one of the pages that I'll show you. And I honestly recommend you need to bump up your grocery to $500. Like, break it down $100 for each of you, because you said that you tend to like go over budget a couple of times, and I really believe that it's because of this, and I'll show you how I break up those numbers in just a little bit. I went ahead and I wrote in all of her expenses, and I broke it down for when her pay schedule is. Now, if you see here on the calendar, there's 2. So her husband gets paid in the middle of the week, and then she gets paid at the end of the week every week. Instead of breaking it down paycheck to paycheck and, separating it that way, because their payday is so close together, I just think it makes it a lot simpler if we just do the bill tracker once. That way you're not having 2 for the same week, if that makes sense. With the bill tracker, I highlighted when she has to have the total amounts in there in her bank account for those bills to be paid. So then we move on to how she breaks down her paycheck budget. So I'm going to start with the 14th payday. They receive a pay of $1,200. Now, she did say that she does give something for tithe, but it's not the full 10%. So that's why I put a little X and I just put it at 5%. 5%. If you're not able to give the full 10% for tithing, if you do want to tithe, but funds are kind of tight, work your way up to it. Maybe cut back a few things. That way you can give the full 10%. If you have that in your heart to do, I definitely recommend to do it because there's so many more blessings that come to you if you do give. It doesn't necessarily have to be at the church, but like give to people in need, things like that. It's really a blessing. When I plugged in her numbers, we used the percentage formula. So why is it that you need to break down your finances into specific categories? I recommend 3 categories. The first one is the expenses, which goes to all of your bills, your daily spending, all of the living expenses. Have it be for your expenses. The second category is your goal. So if you are wanting to become debt-free, which I know you are, if you are wanting to save for an emergency, save for some big purchase, that is the second category, whatever your goal is. And then the third category that I recommend budgeting out for is for the tithe, which is just a charitable donation or giving through your church so that way it can bless the community. Those are the 3 categories that I recommend breaking down in your budget. Very simple, very straight to the point, and that's really why I like using this percentage formula. But if you are in debt, then start with living off of 80% of your income, because it allows you more freedom to pay those minimum payments, those debts, and all of that. So that's what I did here. I plugged in the numbers, 80% towards expenses, 15% for goal, and then 5% for tithe. With what she explained to me, this is how she would technically create her budget. So I'm just putting that she's putting $60 for tithe, and then these are the numbers that we had already calculated in the bill tracker. So what you do, you just go down this column and you'll write in these numbers on your paycheck budget. That's where I got these numbers here. She has the total expenses as $667.25. So if we reference back to this percentage formula, we're seeing that the goal amount for her to live off of is $960. That is her living off of the 80% of the income. So she still has some wiggle room to put towards different variable spending. The remaining dollar amount is $472.75, and we're gonna go ahead and plug in the numbers that she provided to us. So she had said that they have a monthly grocery budget of $240. I think that you might want to increase that just a bit to be realistic. So then we have gas, allowance, pet, sons, and miscellaneous, leaving $140 for these specific categories. If we take the calculator and we add up the 140 and then this 667.25, 807 is what these expenses are, what is leaving her bank account. So we are well below that 80%, which is awesome, based on the numbers that she provided. So now she has those sinking funds that she wants to save for medical, her newborn, birthdays, Christmas, and Thanksgiving. So $135 of her finances can actually be applied for these future savings. And then she said that she wants to really focus on growing her emergency fund. So with the remaining dollar amount, she's able to apply $197.75 for an emergency. So this is how she technically breaks down her budget. But this is how I would recommend breaking down the finances based on what she wants. So a few of the numbers have changed just a bit. I changed the tithe up to the 10%. This is completely personal. No one is obligated or forced to tithe, but she said that she wants to do this. So I applaud you on that. Just know if you give with a cheerful heart, you're gonna see so many blessings come your way. God's math, it is completely different and it doesn't make sense to our math, okay? So if you're one that doesn't believe that, then it's fine. It's perfectly fine. This is all a personal preference, and this is how I would break down her budget if it were me. These expenses all are the same. The only difference was the tithe. And now we get into the different categories. So you're gonna see I increased her grocery budget quite a bit. She says that she budgets $240 for the month. I recommend you bump that up to $500 because you have a pretty big family, and I can probably guess that that's where you go over budget a lot, and you just have to be realistic and give yourself more for food because that's a need, that's a necessity. $125, I would recommend increasing your budget up to that. And then I highlighted certain things that are interchangeable, that you can switch it up. These are items that are not necessarily a need, so you can change the dollar amounts if you wish. But I just increased the allowance and some of these because, again, you said that you go over budget and you want to be honest about how much you actually spend, but try to tighten up the reins a little bit in your budget, but still giving you that freedom to spend money. That way you don't get into more debt. So $265 is this total category. And if we look at the expense amount, $932 is what the expenses comes to. So we're still within that 80% rule. So do you see how that percentage category breakdown works for a budget? I love using that because it allows me a guide to reference back as you're creating your budget. So $147 is what's remaining to grow your savings. Now here is where you want to think of the importance. What is more important for your goal? So if it is to grow your savings, which you have a baby on the way, you said you don't have an emergency fund, so I definitely recommend savings is your most important thing rather than debt. Debt can come later on. Right now you have to build a savings because you have a child on the way and you want to make sure that you're not getting into more debt. So save for your child, and also to have at least $1,000 as that starter emergency fund. So that's why I highlighted these two categories. The first one is the newborn, and then the second one is emergency fund. These are the two that I feel, in my opinion, based on what you shared, that are the most important things right now at this point in your life. So you have to start saving for your child and those medical expenses that are coming along the way. And you also want to start growing your emergency fund, the starter emergency fund of the $1,000, since you don't have anything saved right now. This can be completely altered, but this is just my recommendation on how I would create this particular paycheck budget. So let's move on to the next payday, since some of the bills changed just a bit. So this is for May the 21st, and this is how you break down your budget. So it goes back to that 5% for tithing, since she doesn't feel that she's at that point where she's able to give the full 10%. And then these are the expenses that are coming out. So she has car loans, some credit cards. Now she doesn't keep balances on her credit card. She does pay it off at the end of the month. That's great that she doesn't carry balances. You just want to be very disciplined when it comes to you swiping your card, because sometimes things can happen and you can get a little too excited and swipe too much. These are her expenses. She has storage, again, credit cards. The expenses are pretty much the same dollar amount as the prior paycheck. And then again, we have these categories, groceries, and the variable expenses. Her sinking funds, same dollar amounts I just plugged in, and then her emergency fund. So now this is my suggestion. I recommend switching up her grocery, tithing that 10%, and then she can adjust what sinking funds she wants to save for each pay. So I recommend, of course, still saving for the newborn and emergency, but you can switch up the other sinking funds that you are wanting to save for each paycheck. So you can do like an every other thing and just slowly save $5 here, $10 there, because a little bit does go a long way when it comes to your savings. And then this is my last recommendation for how I would write up her budget for the last pay in May. Here you can see that I added in some other sinking funds and I just adjusted some of the dollar amounts. But by doing that, you're applying a little bit less to the emergency fund. So that's where you want to really have that conversation with your husband, with your wife, and see what is most important at that point in time. So sit down before you get paid, but in the beginning of the week, have like a review and say, hey, what is our focus on for our finances? Like, what is the need? What is most important? And really have that true conversation. It doesn't have to be like super serious, but just, share your heart and your concerns with each other and be honest. Share what your goals are. What are your dreams? This is where you can really look and review your finances and see if you want to have everything just go to your newborn, or if you want all of this to just go to emergency fund, or if you want to maybe apply only $5 for each of these sinking funds since you're kind of tight on some of the finances. If you don't want to have an allowance for that particular pay. However, you want to be honest and not be too tight on your finances, because that's where you can set yourself up for failure. We don't want that. We want to set you up for success. So be truthful when it comes to these numbers here. That's why I still left in the allowance on this paycheck budget, because you may want to buy a cup of coffee. And if you have that in your like allowance or spending money, it's okay for you to do. And sometimes we can be a little too tight and you honestly just don't feel like cooking or something and you want to eat out. And so that's where you can tend to swipe that credit card and cause you to stumble a little bit. So give yourself room to spend. It's okay to budget spending even though you are in debt, even though you may not have savings, but try not to go overboard with that, if that makes sense. So this is the May budgeting. So I did the same thing for June, and I wrote in her June bill tracker. And here is where, looking over the budget, what I might suggest. So I highlighted certain things that kind of stood out to me when it came to some of your bills. So if you have any subscriptions, these are things that you don't necessarily need. You have an ink subscription, so is that really a necessary thing? I don't know, you work from home. It all depends on you of what your preference is. Another thing is this HBO subscription. Maybe cut back and not have cable for a bit, or not cable, but HBO. Then you have this car wash subscription. So that's something that is, again, a luxury, but you might think it's worth it. So again, take all of this with a grain of salt. I'm just giving like certain suggestions on what can be possible for you to cut back on, so that way you can apply this $37 for savings every month. That's just what I suggest. And again, as you see here, I did another change on her sinking funds for this paycheck for June, and we just did a revision on what we're saving for these sinking funds. So if you are in a similar boat as this, you have some debt, you have no savings, you can switch what you're going to be saving for each paycheck. You don't have to be saving for the exact same thing every paycheck. You can swap and say, I'm going to save for medical this paycheck, and then next week save for the holidays, and just switch it out depending on what you think is most important, what is more time sensitive, or you have a deadline for. So that is just my suggestion when it comes to this particular paycheck. There are certain things that I see that you have debt. Let me flip to that page. So you have some car loan debt. If you want to review your car loan and maybe see if it's at all a possibility for you to sell your car. We have done that, but it's all a personal preference. That's something that you can do. You really can work towards doing like the debt snowball. You can list your debts smallest to largest. There's also that debt avalanche where you list it based on the interest rates. So just do your research and see what is beneficial and what makes sense for you and your family. So I'm not sure what kind of cars you have, but with the $15,000 car loan, that might be something that you may look at and be a little overwhelmed with. But really, with what you guys have here, yes, $29,000 in debt is a lot, but you breaking down your budget into the categories and kind of tightening up the reins just a bit when it comes to your spending, you can achieve this in a timely manner that's realistic. So just stay encouraged. Don't overwhelm yourself and just feel like you're failing and that you can't get ahead on your finances, that you feel like you don't have enough money left over at the end of the month. That's really where breaking down your budget like this allows you more control. And again, be realistic with your spending. So number one, I recommend increasing your grocery budget. If you are budgeting $240 for a family of 5, I think that might be a little too tight. I might be wrong, but I think that you might be a little too low when it comes to that. So you have room enough in your budget to increase that to a realistic amount of like $500 monthly for you all, and you'll be fine. Maybe tighten up the reins on some of the allowance, but give yourself that wiggle room. Give yourself that freedom to spend money. If you want to buy a drink, if you want to buy a purse, if you want to do something like that, give yourself a little bit of a budget to do those things. That is my recommendation for you if you're in a similar budget as our friend here. Let me know if you have any suggestions or recommendations for her, and be nice about it. But again, budgeting is personal. These are all suggestions from me, and if I woke up in your shoes, this is how I would lay out the budget worksheets and how I would write up your budget. So thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed today's video, hit the thumbs up button, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and I will see you guys right here in a brand new video. Bye guys.